Everybody would silence your cell phones. We're going to begin in under 1 minute, please. Good morning, everybody. It is Wednesday, April 12th, 2023. This is a special meeting of the Commissioners of the City of Rehoboth Beach. We are live streaming at City Hall Commissioners Room, second floor. Thank you all for being here. I'd like to call this meeting to order at 9 a.m. With that, we're going to start off with a roll call. Commissioner Tony Sharp.
Here.
Commissioner Jay Lagree.
Here.
Commissioner Ed Chernowski.
Here.
Commissioner Patrick Gossett.
Here.
Commissioner Tim Bennett.
Here.
Commissioner Bunky Markert.
Here.
And Mayor Stan Mills. We have a full complement of the mayor and commissioners, and therefore we have a quorum and are able to formally conduct business today. I'd also like to introduce the staff here that helps us run the meetings, and City Secretary Ann Womack is here, City Manager Lawrence Christian, Kevin Williams, Public Works Director, and Lynn Cohen is back here, Communications Specialist, and I want to thank all those that are here in person for being here. We will have an opportunity, as I normally mention at each meeting, you will have an opportunity to speak and give input, probably because this is an introductory presentation, multiple presentations that are the first time. It's probably best for efficiency to allow us to get through all the presentations, and if you would make a list of your questions so that you can ask them at the end of the presentations rather than throughout. I do want to thank all those that are watching virtually. This is a very important topic, and I hope you all are watching. Remember, this is recorded, so you can go back and watch this again and again and again if you choose to do so. Support documents, those are documents that support our agenda items, such as the presentations in front of us today are embedded in the agenda. I think, in fact, every presentation that we have today is already embedded in the agenda, so you get to see exactly what we get to see. With that, I will share at the beginning, my expectations is that we won't come to a finite conclusion today, but rather have this reported in the media and give the opportunity for more members of the public to give additional feedback before we have a subsequent follow-up meeting and further discuss and maybe come to conclusions possibly at the second meeting or so. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the chair of the Stormwater Utility Task Force, Commissioner Jay Lagree, to make introductions and establish the objective of today's meeting.
Thank you. I was chairman of the task force of the Stormwater Utility Task Force. It's about a year old now, and we met, I think, 8 times, and it was a group of the most experienced, intelligent, sharpest people that I've ever worked with in my life. And the task force meetings were exchanging. Everybody was interested. We had everybody taking part. I've never been with an experience like that before, and it was a great pleasure for me. And some of the task force members are here. Susan Stewart, would you raise your hand? Bruce Williams, raise your hand. Jan Conacy, raise your hand. Who am I missing now? It was a great task force. All this was made possible by Public Works Director Kevin Williams, who facilitated, who brought data, who gave us access to everything. And when that happens, you can make really good decisions. And we did make really good decisions. And today we're going to have a final presentation of the feasibility report by our consultant, who is Christine Estes. She's a professional engineer. She's very well qualified to say anything that needs to be said about stormwater. And who else? Is Amy Mendelson is here, has the same, she's also with our consultant, AECOM, and we're glad to have her here. She's the author of all the minutes that we've read all through this procedure. And what I'd like to do today, the most important part of this stormwater utility that we're going to form, that we're going to make, that we're going to develop, is outreach. I cannot do outreach unless we have a consensus by the Board of Commissioners that we're going to move forward. Once that happens, we can put our outreach education plan into operation, which is ready to launch. Lynn Coyne, our communications director, is ready to go. We're all ready to go. We just need to have a consensus to move forward by the Board of Commissioners. First, though, I'd like to have a presentation of the final report by our consultant, Christine Estes, who just happened to run the Boston Marathon. And she, hold up your medal. It's just amazing. And we're going to hear a presentation of the final feasibility report from her. And then after that, she'll have discussion. And then after that, I will talk about funding and mitigation and some of the things that are sure to be asked by the public just immediately, and probably re-emphasize the recommendations from the task force. But thank you, Mayor, and we're ready to go forward with the consultant.
Thank you, Jay. And again, I want to thank all your members of the task force. They put in a considerable amount of time. I want to thank everybody. I do want to make mention, just a brief note, that the report indicated that the applicants made application and were selected. Actually, we ended up putting everybody that applied on there. So I just want to make sure that we recognize everybody that applied got the position, and they did a great job. So with that, Jay, I'm going to have you introduce Christine again and hand it over to her.
This is Christine Estes. She's with AECOM Consultants, and we're going to hear the final report of the Rehoboth Beach Stormwater Utility going forward.
Okay, great. My slides are being presented at the moment. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Commissioner Lagree, for the nice introduction. I work with AECOM. I'm based in the DC area. I've worked on a number of different stormwater utilities for different cities, and most recently for the city of Alexandria, Virginia, who has implemented a stormwater utility fairly recently. So today, I really want to just give you a tour of the final stormwater feasibility study report that AECOM developed based on the 8 different task force meetings that Jay mentioned earlier that were happened. So this sort of compiles all the recommendations and sort of gives the steps forward as well. There will be some time for questions afterwards. So these are the contents of the report. I will step through each of these sections and sort of highlight the key items for focus in each of these different sections here. The report starts with a 2-page executive summary. It's really meant to just summarize what's in the report. The report itself is, I think, about 34 pages. So if someone didn't want to read that whole report, the 2-page executive summary really does give a concise summary of what was discussed. It does describe why a stormwater utility was investigated in the first place. It discusses the establishment of the task force and what their key recommendations are. It also discusses using billing units to set the rates based on impervious surface. It does include estimated rates for typical single-family residents. It doesn't include all of the details that are in the report, of course, such as what the rates, estimated rates might be for a non-residential property or a multifamily residential property. Those sort of details are in the report. But it does provide also pretty good summary information that could be used for public outreach in the future as well. So for the introduction here, it does provide a more in-depth background and overview of why the city investigated a stormwater utility in the first place. There's a lot of costs associated with stormwater management and the lakes that the city has as well. There's a lot of costs involved with that for just general operations and maintenance, administrative costs, as well as capital projects as well that the city has focused on stormwater management. So, you know, a stormwater utility does provide a lot of benefits, and that's actually covered in the next section. But the main reason for developing a stormwater utility is really to have a dedicated source of funding to deal just with stormwater maintenance costs. You know, typically, and the way the city does it now is pull those costs from the general fund. The general fund is used for a lot of other things, as you know, like education, transportation, things like that. So this provides a dedicated source of funding just to deal with stormwater costs. The introduction also includes a summary of stormwater utilities nationwide. As of 2021, there are over 2,000 stormwater utilities throughout the country. This is reported in the West Kentucky University survey from 2022. There's you know, throughout the country, people do it different ways. You know, that's why feasibility is done, to really identify the best ways to implement a stormwater utility within each specific community. It also includes a summary of stormwater utilities in Delaware. There are 3 communities in Delaware now that do have stormwater utilities: the city of Wilmington, Newark, and city of Lewis. And there is information on their monthly rates within the report as well. Section 2 is the stormwater utility framework. So this really does, you know, lay out the benefits of setting up a stormwater utility. It also includes Delaware's enabling legislation that outlines allowable uses for stormwater utility revenue, such as that administration costs, those operation maintenance costs that I discussed. It does allow for using the stormwater utility revenue for capital improvement projects as well. It lists the components of a stormwater utility framework, such as setting that rate structure, defining a billing method, setting up appeals process. It sort of lays out the sort of structure for setting up a stormwater utility as well. Section 3 is the evaluation process. This really lays out the establishment of the task force that was discussed earlier with 13 different various stakeholders. They really were a good group, as Commissioner Lagree mentioned, really intelligent, provided a lot of thought and input into the discussions that we had. We had 8 different task force discussions starting from April 2022 through this past February. And it really, you know, this sort of lays out the makeup of the task force, who was involved, and why they were established in the first place. Section 4 is really lays out the revenue that the city wants to generate from the stormwater utility. So it looks at all of the expenditures and different levels of service, and we're looking at what's expected to be the first 5 years of the stormwater utility, starting in 2025. So we evaluated all the administration costs, the operation maintenance costs, as well as potential capital improvement projects as well over the first 5 years, and applied a 5% inflation factor to account for, obviously things are increasing as we move forward. Components, you know, included that program administration I mentioned, also planning and engineering costs as well. Any projects like that were included in those estimates. So that was really needed to determine how much the city wanted to generate from the stormwater utility to cover expenditures. So, you know, just wanted to note though that prior to implementation, those expenditures will need to be reviewed again to reevaluate before an actual fee or rate is set. There was a recommendation also to perform an annual evaluation of the expenditures and allow for an adjustment of the fees accordingly if expenditures increased or decreased and those needs change. Section 5 is more of a, it gets a little bit more technical for those of you that are engineers like myself. It does describe the source of the impervious surface data that was used for the analysis. The University of Delaware did an assessment of that impervious surface area to determine the accuracy of the data. And then AECOM actually did some further analysis of that data as well. We wanted to see how much of the impervious surface throughout the city was in different land use categories, as shown in this graphic here. 39% of the impervious surface is made up by just the roads and right-of-ways within the city. And then another 39% is actual single-family residential properties, which is a pretty high percent for a city. This section also describes some data discrepancies that we found when looking at the GIS data. Nothing major. I mean, the data is fairly accurate, but there was some discrepancies that we found. Like some swimming pools were included in the impervious surface, but some were not. So things like that will need to be resolved before if the stormwater utility is approved and we move into the implementation phase. Section 6 is revenue methodology. It describes how using the impervious surface is really the basis for setting the rates for a stormwater utility program. If you think about it, the more impervious surface that a property has, the more stormwater runoff they're going to contribute to the system. So that's why the impervious surface area is used to set those rates, because the more impervious surface you have, the more you're going to be charged. That makes it equitable into recovering the costs for each property towards the costs of the stormwater maintenance program. So this section also recommends categorizing like properties together based on a set range of impervious surface. So this allows for sort of a balance. It is possible to, for each property to look at their impervious surface and charge based on exactly their impervious surface. It becomes a little bit more difficult to implement and more costly to bill something like that. So it is recommended to really group like properties together so that it is easier to administer, but is still equitable. I'll get into a little bit more details about how that's set as well. The task force also did recommend that the stormwater utility be funded through new revenue and not continue to be used out of the general funds. So there are some different rate structures that can be used to develop a stormwater utility. The task force looked at using stormwater billing units as well as equivalent runoff units. For stormwater billing unit, you usually set a set unit size. The recommended size for the city was set at 50 square feet. So that we also determined, based on the impervious surface within the city, a typical single-family home has about 3,000 square feet of impervious surface. So in that case, that single-family residential property would be charged 6 stormwater billing units if the billing unit is set at 500 square feet. For the non-residential property, an example one that's 30,000 square feet of impervious surface, they would be charged 60 stormwater billing units. There's a lot more details about how this is generated in the report as well, and I can answer questions on that afterwards too, because it does get a little complicated. Another method is the equivalent runoff unit, and this is really based on the median impervious surface for a single-family residential property. So in the city, that was about 3,000 square feet, so that would be set as 1 ERU. In this case, a lot of times you can either cities can set a flat fee and charge everyone 1 ERU, or you can have sort of tiers based on how much impervious surface each property has and charge based on tiers. The task force did recommend to use a stormwater billing unit, which unlike the ERU is not based on the median value, but rather a set unit, which was recommended at 500 square feet, and that can be set smaller. There's no need to actually set those residential tiers that a lot of cities have for those range of fees to make the fee more equitable. This allows for setting the billing unit at a smaller increment and a larger range of fees throughout the city. It's also being used a lot more often now. Most of the the cities that have stormwater utilities do use the ERU method, but as impervious surface data is improving over time, more and more cities are actually now using the stormwater billing unit method. So each property, residential and non-residential, is charged a fee based on how many billing units their property contains. The task force, as I mentioned earlier, does recommend that the stormwater billing unit be set at 500 square feet. So that typical single-family home would be charged 6 stormwater billing units. There are different rate structures. You can have the tiered rate structures, as I mentioned, usually with the ERU method, or a variable method where you group like properties together. This was recommended by the task force. Or you could, as I mentioned earlier, just charge a flat fee, which I believe in Lewis they're still just charging a flat fee at the moment. This section does also include applied rates based on looking at different revenue. So we did look at some estimated fees, and those are presented in this section of the report, looking at including all operation and maintenance costs and capital expenses, looking at reducing that amount by 39% to account for that 39% that's the part of the roads and right-of-ways, and also just looking at covering operation and maintenance expenses only. The fees, especially for looking at including all of the stormwater management costs, are fairly high for the city compared to other cities that have stormwater utilities throughout the country. A lot of that is because there's a lower amount of properties within the city, which accounts for that. There's also a lot of costs that the city has with the lakes as well. So the recommendation is also to investigate some alternative funding sources, which I think Commissioner Lagree is going to mention a little bit later as well, to help reduce those costs since they are fairly high compared to the stormwater fees throughout the country. So just looking at some preliminary estimated rates, using that stormwater billing unit set at 500 square feet, all properties will be charged based on impervious surface divided by that stormwater billing unit. And so these numbers account for all stormwater costs, including potential capital projects that could occur as well. So looking at the first 5 years of the stormwater utility, so these are some of the annual rates starting about $423 a year per single family residential property with 3,000 square feet. These obviously vary depending on how much impervious surface each property has, and they vary by that 500 square foot increment. Obviously, those fees can be reduced if the stormwater utility is set to not cover the capital expenses as well. So as you can see, it almost halves the fee amounts if we're only looking at the operation and maintenance expenses, not looking at the potential capital projects as well. The next section covers exemptions. We talked about what properties would be charged the fee and what properties would be exempt. A few properties were discussed to be exempt, including federal properties, which I think maybe just be the post office, the state and city rights-of-way, as well as DelDOT roads. DelDOT does have their own stormwater requirements that they have to meet, and they have their own maintenance program. It's also very difficult to charge DelDOT. The other Delaware communities do not charge DelDOT at the moment. So the task force is recommending to include residential and commercial properties, city properties, the Rehoboth Elementary School, as well as tax-exempt properties such as religious organizations. The tax-exempt properties still have impervious surface and are contributing to the runoff to the stormwater system. So to be equitable, most communities do charge tax-exempt properties. Some additional considerations that need to be considered before, if the stormwater utility is approved to move forward with implementation. You should be considering a credit program if communities want to make changes on the property that will reduce the stormwater runoff, such as installing a rain barrel or putting in a rain garden, things like that, that the city probably wants to encourage to help reduce the runoff within the city. A credit program can be set up to help reduce each property owner's fee if they do implement some of these best practices on their property. And so it will have to be determined how much, what sort of practices the city will be giving credit for and how much credit will be given for those practices. We'll have to also determine the billing method, if it gets attached to the water bill, how that gets implemented as well. Also, the city should be setting up an appeals process. So if someone disagrees with the impervious surface area that was calculated for their property, they can appeal that to reduce their fee. Or if they somehow reduce the impervious surface, if they take out their driveway and put in a pervious pavement or something like that, they could submit an appeal to reduce their fee. The city will also have to develop a stormwater ordinance that will need to be adopted. A big component for moving forward is public outreach. Educating the public of why this fee would be implemented, the importance of it, and the need for managing stormwater. And Section 10 is really just concluding everything and summarizing all the recommendations that the task force made. It does include things that will need to be resolved prior to or during the implementation phase of a stormwater utility, resolving the GIS data issues that I mentioned that AECOM did find, provide those details on a credit program, establishing that appeals process, determining a billing mechanism, drafting that stormwater ordinance, as well as developing a public outreach and engagement plan. And this image here is just showing sort of an example of one pool that was included and another pool that was not included in the impervious surface within the same neighborhood. So things like that will need to get resolved. Okay, and then sort of the timeline and next steps for this. Usually the implementation of a stormwater utility can take 8 months to a year to actually implement, to do all those the list of items that I mentioned here, to get through those steps. So that can take about 8 months to a year. And then, so I think the city would be targeting to implement the stormwater utility, if it is approved, around April 1st, the beginning of that fiscal year of 2025. So there'd be time to do that public outreach, get feedback from the community, and work out some of the details that need to be worked out before the stormwater utility is actually implemented. And that's all I have today. So I'm open to questions.
Let me open it up to the commissioners up here first before we go to the public. Or do you want us to wait till after your
No, dude, just what you're doing.
presentation? So any comments by the commissioners at this point? Commissioner Markert and then Commissioner Bennett.
Okay. The only thing I was just trying to figure out, any discussion with regard to how much natural area is on a lot? How does that affect? It doesn't appear to. You're only really concerned about the pervious surfaces, but if if a particular property has more natural area than another one, does that benefit or doesn't count?
That's not accounted for in the stormwater utility. It's only looking at the impervious surface
is
area,
that,
so.
Is there a benefit? I mean, the fact that like a particular lot would have like more catchment area for rainwater, for rainwater or whatever, or we just naturally assume that during a storm event, it runs off because it can't be absorbed that quickly? Is that the kind of justification?
That would be accounted for in the credits process that I mentioned.
Okay.
So if they were catching a lot of that runoff on their property and maintaining it on their property, they could be given a credit. They would have to apply for that credit.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think in terms of in deriving the billing unit. that it would be based on some kind of a percentage, or at least a percentage would be applied based on that, you know, I don't know, but which would result in, I guess, in a reduction or a discount or something, but I'm just curious.
It's only based on the percent, the amount of impervious surface.
Right,
So a very large property could have 3,000 square feet of impervious surface, and a smaller property could still have 3,000 square feet of impervious surface. They would still be charged the same rate.
And I guess I'm looking at how do you build incentives, you know, into a system like this, you know, where obviously people are going to be confronted with how much, you know, impervious surface they have, and they can adjust it based on that. But, you know, I would think that if, you know, certain thing, and I'm assuming, is a swimming pool non-pervious? I mean, because it catches rainwater, does that
A
count?
swimming pool would be considered impervious, so
Impervious,
included as
okay.
part of the
Right,
impervious surface
okay.
area.
So that's a benefit for those who have pool. But you know, the fact that you're on a property, you know, I live in a neighborhood where we have sort of larger lots and things like that. So I'm thinking, you know, we may contribute, or, you know, not contribute, but benefit or contribute to the well-being of the city because we have this extra land, you know, but I don't know how much really that would be, you know, so I'm just trying to figure that out. Okay, well, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Commissioner Bennett?
Thank you. Thanks for your work on this, and thanks to the committee, Jay.
Absolutely.
I just had a quick question. Maybe we'll discuss this during Jay's presentation, but you mentioned Lewis, Newark, and Wilmington have stormwater management programs, and it looked like Lewis is about $72 a year, Newark $60 a year, and Wilmington $100 to $120, and our estimate at $432. I was just wondering why ours was so much higher. Or is that for discussion later?
Well, a lot of that is for that higher rate that was including potential capital projects too that are quite large. So the other communities within Delaware are really just accounting for their operation and maintenance costs, and in many cases not accounting for the full amount of their operation and maintenance costs.
So if they did have, so would that be a surcharge then to the residents if they did have to do a large project?
It would likely come from another funding source, such as the general funds. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Anybody else? Commissioner Srnowski?
I've got a few things, so bear with me, and if it's going to be covered at another time, just please defer it. So I guess what I didn't see here was a justification for overall the need, as in we've looked at what the needs are, what the capital costs are going to be over a period of time. This is how much money we need, and then we've justified how we're going to break that out in terms of a fee. And it sounds like that has been accounted for.
Page 3 of the report.
In the report, not the presentation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the green cover report.
Okay. And then, if you could, another question. It sounds like the city, the recommendation is that city properties should be charged a fee. We're just paying ourselves?
So the city property is included and would be charged a fee. How they pay or that needs to be determined during the implementation phase.
Okay.
So that the city rights of way and roads are not, but other city properties are included.
Okay. And when you're talking about how the GIS system is looking at impervious versus pervious, how is it determining, gravel? Does it look at that as concrete, or does it consider that pervious?
That the gravel is considered this not impervious.
Okay.
So that usually, it's the way that it was generated was from aerial imagery.
Okay.
I think this was the Chesapeake Bay data from 2016 that used earlier aerial imagery to create that impervious surface data. So they typically would not include, there could be errors where they did include some of that gravel area, but those are things that would likely be investigated more during the implementation phase to try to remove things like that might have been picked up previously as impervious, but really should be pervious.
Okay. And in the group's discussion, because I don't see any recommendations here that would be a part of the implementation, but looking at our building code where we consider things impervious that indeed are pervious, such as gravel, as
Clamshells, maybe.
clamshells, yeah, other things like that. Is that part of the recommendation?
Well, it is part of the recommendation to have that appeal process. So if someone does have that, they have replaced their driveway with some pervious surface, like crushed clamshells, they could submit that to the city and ask for that impervious surface area to be removed from their calculations of their fee.
Okay, but not to go back and look at our building code and perhaps change anything
Yes, yes.
in how we're.
We need
Well,
a,
there would have to be an ordinance developed.
Yeah.
To implement or to establish the utility, and part of that, in that stormwater ordinance, would list out the definitions, and we would say, you put a concrete driveway, it's impermeable. You put clamshells, we would define what we would mean by permeable and impermeable
Okay,
during that ordinance development.
thank you. Good.
Anything else, Ed?
No, that's all I have. Thank
All
you.
right, anybody else? Commissioner Sharp?
I may have a couple of questions, but I'm more interested in hearing what the public has to say before I ask them.
Okay. Anybody else? Commissioner Gossett?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks to the committee for their work. It was, I know, quite a lot of work and a lot of time spent, and I appreciate the results. A couple of things, based on the 432 annual cost, how many participants was that based on? Was there a number of properties, or what was the big nut divided by how much to come up with the 432?
And let me see if I can show you a graphic here. Let's see. We did analyze that.
Okay.
And there was a graphic in the report. Let's see if I can. Whoop.
say the question again, Commissioner.
How many properties or 5,000 square foot units are we looking at to come up with that 432? What the number of participants
Yeah,
are? kind of
she has a graph, there it is there.
Yeah, here we go. Can you all see that okay? I can try to zoom in.
This is
here.
a very important graph, by the way.
What page is that on?
You have a page number, Christine?
Yep, let me see.
Yeah, that's
That's
on
page
page
18 of the report.
Thank you.
Okay.
So the y-axis here is the total number of properties that have that amount of impervious surface. As you can see, we found that the median for a single-family property was 3,000. You can see here that high number around the 3,000 mark. So there was about 90, I'd say 93 properties or so that had about 3,000 square feet of impervious surface on their property.
And this is based on GIS data, is that correct?
Yes.
And when and who produced that GIS data?
So let me,
I mean, how relevant or how frequent or
that is
recent was that done? I'm
discussed
just
in,
curious.
I think the data was collected in 2016, and the report was done in 2017.
Okay.
That may be off a year each way. If you remember back when we participated in the Resilient Communities Partnership with the other coastal towns, part of that effort developed two major products. One was the impervious area coverage from history and now over the last, Evan can help me, maybe 15 years or so, and the change in pervious and impervious area in our community over that period of time. And then a second product was a best management practices manual of things that we could implement, or homeowners could implement, or community could implement to reduce stormwater runoff. So those are the two big products that came from that. With that GIS data, which would have been extremely expensive to try to gather on our own, that kind of the impetus to this. We've got this data now. Why don't we look at what next steps would be? So 2016-ish, so we'd have to go back and look at all the new houses constructed since that time and that kind of thing, but gave us a really good baseline of data that we could use.
So it is the intent to gather updated GIS information if we go forward with this?
I think at this point, we would probably be easier just to go around and look at building permits since 2016 and say they tore a house down, put a bigger one up, then we would go out and recalculate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Go ahead here.
Yeah, just a quick question. I'm sorry, I did not read the report before today, and there's a lot of information. But in the presentation, you reference the potential annual cost for a single-family residence. I'm assuming that the same rate would apply to commercial properties?
For non-residential properties?
non-residential,
Yeah, so that information is included in section 7 of the report.
Okay.
Where we provide the estimated rates for a typical single-family residential property, as well as non-residential properties or multifamily properties such as condos. We do have some example rates in there as well.
Okay. But the same rate would be used across the board?
Yes, yep. 500 square feet
Well,
of,
the billing unit would be the
Yeah.
same.
Okay.
But yes, like a condo as a whole would be charged more than a single-family home, yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Jay? If not, then why don't we take this opportunity to go to the public? I would suggest that, Jay, if something, a question comes up that covers your presentation, that you speak up, and we ask them to defer until you make your presentation. Also, I would like your comments specific to this presentation so far, then you'll have another opportunity when Jay speaks and another opportunity at the end for broader comments, if you like. So is there anybody, Jan, you raised your hand first. If you would, I'd give your name and identify yourself and your relationship to the city, as well as a reminder that you were on the Utility Task Force.
Jan Conacy, 42 Oak Avenue. I was representing Save Our Lakes 3 on the task force, and I, I don't, Jay, I could ask Jay you this question. Are you going to be talking on the executive summary, the recommendations prior to implementing a utility fee?
yes, I'm going to,
Okay, so I shouldn't talk about, or.
Oh, no, you go
Okay,
ahead.
lots of people ask questions about impervious surfaces. And impervious surfaces have been mandated in Dewey Beach, and Jay can correct me, either since 2009 or 2013, a very long time. It's unusual for Dewey Beach to be ahead of Rehoboth in something, but they are, and we should be mandating, and should have mandated a long time ago, that all hard surfaces, parking lots, driveways, patios, if you have space for them, should be pervious. It's inexcusable today. And this was really brought home to me because, like my neighbor says, on our street, we don't have stormwater flooding. However, at a Board of Adjustment meeting, when a local hotel was requesting more hard surfaces, neighbors came. I mean, this couple, she cried, because when the same hotel went from a gravel parking lot to a paved parking lot, they began to have flooding in their yard almost instantly. And their shed has been ruined, their backyard has been ruined, the area around their house has been ruined. I think Kevin remembers who they are. I didn't know who they were. But I mean, she cried. And then I thought about the impact, if you're the only one on the street having that, and what paving a parking lot does. So I think it's really, really important that, and one of the things that the committee decided is that if we are going to have a stormwater utility fee, there were certain precursors. One was we need to have a stormwater management plan. And as many of you know, SOLA has been advocating that since I think 2005, and it's been in every CDP, and we haven't done it. Dewey Beach also has a stormwater management plan. And also, we wanted pervious surfaces throughout the town. We also wanted the cost to be divided among residents and visitors. So the residents weren't shouldering the entire cost themselves, and it could be multiple ways that you can do that. So that's the things that are really important to me, is this putting a human face on what stormwater runoff can do. Thank you.
Thank you. State your name and relationship to the city, and a reminder that you're on the Utility Task Force.
Bruce Williams, Newbold Square, president of the Condo Association and on the task force.
Thank you, Bruce.
I have 3 points that I'd like clarification on from your presentation. The first one is, you said that the proposed implementation would be April 1 of 2005. So that's FY 2026, right? So 2 years from now. So I had been under the impression earlier in our discussions that it was anticipated that there might be an implementation of a year sooner than that.
We're hoping that we can get it ready to go by the beginning of FY '25, and that would be 1 July for the first bill going out in 2024.
Right. Okay,
We're hoping we can get it in a year.
that's what I was anticipating.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Bruce was one of the most valuable members of the task force. He'd been through this before. He served in city council, elected office in Maryland. He's a wealth of information. He served on our utility task force when we did wastewater. A great member.
If I could just add one thing, Commissioner, is I think we would be ready to implement by beginning of the next fiscal year. The question would be, how much advanced notification do we want to provide to businesses and homeowners so they can then budget for those projected increases if it goes that far? So I think our report and our if the decision is to move forward, we would target having everything ready, implementation plan developed, ordinance developed, all those things by around April or so of 2024. And then it would be a board decision as to when to actually implement it, so that we give people enough time to prepare for the fee, whatever it turns out to be.
And as Kevin just said, there's many things that can come along that can slow us down, and that's why we really need to get our outreach going, and we need to be able to get going forward on this. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bruce.
The second point is that there was a third option for how the rates would be set that I don't think you covered, which was the option to remove the 39% of the city roads.
We'll talk about that. I'm going to talk about that.
And, and the third point was, when you talked about city streets and rights-of-way, my thought when you said that was rights-of-way aren't necessarily impervious. If it's, a paper street that is grass, or the sides of the road, so I was wondering about how that is defined.
How the impervious surface for the roads were defined?
Yes.
And that 39% for the whole city that makes up the roads and right-of-ways, that was strictly from that GIS impervious surface data. So we weren't looking at any potential grass areas within there. We're just looking at what was in the GIS data that defined the impervious surface area.
Good, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Bruce. Next, anybody else? Suzanne, David, and then Sam, and then Suzanne. David, just remind us who you are and your relationship to the city, please.
Dave Geisler, 17 Cookman Street. Today we're talking about a lot of money. What's the money going to be spent for? Are you talking about infrastructure things? Excuse me. Could you speak into the mic? Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. My name's Dave Geisler, 17 Cookman Street. Today we talked about a lot of money being spent, a lot of money being collected. My question is, what expenditures are generating these expenses?
Okay, and that's shown in Table 2 of the report, which I'm showing on the screen here. These are estimates, so that these costs include some of the city staff that help manage the stormwater management program, includes vehicle and equipment that are used for stormwater management, additional services, such as BMP inspections, screenings, things like that, as well as the capital expenses. And those.
What are the capital expenses?
So those are shown here. Some of them are storm sewer cleaning for some various streets within the city, stormwater assessment and repairs, the Baltimore and Wilmington Avenue Streetscape project, the Bayard Avenue stormwater improvements, comprehensive stormwater management plan, which was discussed, but that actually, we do expect that to occur before the implementation of the stormwater utility. So that you can see that as a line item here, but the costs are not included. So that will be completed before implementation.
Where do I get
And
my
then
hands on that?
lake management plans as well.
Where can I get that?
What's that?
Where can I get that?
Kevin?
That information?
The report?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Is the report available publicly yet, or is it on the city's website? Okay.
Printed it out.
And that's on page 10, that spreadsheet. You can find it, it's online, and you, yeah, there you go.
Thank you very much.
Mayor, can
No,
we
we're
get
spending money,
copies
just
of
don't know
that
what
for the
we're spending
public?
it for.
I don't know why
Are-
we don't have
are
them
you-
available.
Planning on constructing any storm management ponds in the city? Is that anywhere in the future?
I'll leave that up to Kevin, but I'm not sure if any new ponds are.
I'm sorry, I didn't even hear
I didn't hear
the
the
question.
question.
So could
I'm
you help me?
sorry. Thought I was talking to the lady.
I can't answer if I can't hear your
Okay,
question.
in the future, are you anticipating building any storm management ponds in the city of Rehoboth?
Beside the two that we have now,
What two do we have?
we have Lake Draw and Silver Lake.
Very good. You are planning on using
We are
them?
concentrating on them by all means.
There you go. Okay, you also have a series of catch basins in the city that drain down into the sand only. Are you planning on continue using them?
So
Or-
maintenance of those facilities would be included in these costs as well.
Okay, but you're not planning on connecting them together. You're just planning on maintaining them? What I'm looking for, are you going to tear up the streets and put a bunch of pipes in just to connect these different catch basins?
I'll leave that up to the city.
Yeah, so as part of the capital improvement plan for the next 5 years, we have a couple of significant capital projects. One is up in what we call Basin 40, which is in the Sussex, Kent, Dover kind of area, because there is not an
That's where I live, so
existing.
I'm very interested.
There's not an existing stormwater infrastructure there, so there's a project that has been scoped and preliminary design to add stormwater infrastructure there. The other large capital project is the Byard Avenue storm sewer to enlarge that.
Okay, at Kent, Sussex, 4th Street, Cookman, what capital projects are you planning on, are you preliminary planning on in that area? What type of structures?
It would be in stormwater inlets and pipe connecting, I think the outfall would take it into Lake Gerard.
Kevin, and the purpose for that specific project is to resolve some flooding in the streets.
Correct.
Long-standing water after rains. Is that
Correct.
Would the catch basins, could you use catch basins in that area that drain into the sand below, just like you have down at 3rd? And, okay, I'll go ask the question. Down at 3rd and Cookman, there are 3 catch basins. What do they drain into?
I believe they drain to Lake Gerard.
The same thing down at Oak Street, in the low area in Oak Street? Those 2 catch basins?
Oak and what?
Oak and Oak. If you come off 3rd Street and you go down a hill, there's 2 catch basins there. Where do they drain into?
I think it's Lake Gerard, but I'd have to pull the GIS system up to confirm that. But I'm pretty confident they go to Lake Gerard, that area.
I don't think they do. That's why I'm asking these questions. I'm saying, well, I'd rather tear up the streets to tie these different catch basins together to drain into Lake Gerard. Could we just implement putting, like we have in other places in the city, catch basins that just drain into the sandy soil below, which we do maintain. We go through and clean them out periodically.
So I guess to rephrase it, was there any look at French drains in lieu of
French drains.
adding linear drain pipes to it?
Not under that Basin 40 proposal.
Please look into it. It'd be greatly appreciated.
Anything else, David? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Commissioner Czerniawski, to address your note of why didn't we print these out. You know, we don't always print out lengthy reports, but one thing we do and we take pride in is when they're available ahead of the meeting, we embed them in the agenda. So these are all embedded in the agenda. And if you have trouble printing them out at home, then certainly come to us and we'll print out a hard copy for you. But again, this is an introductory discussion, so it will be back in front of us again.
Yeah.
Sam Cooper.
Thank you. Sam Cooper, 13 Newcastle Street. To me, this comes down to money primarily, and I think I'll save that discussion for a bit, but several things you've said were curious to me. One, you called out the school specifically for inclusion, and yet I would guess that they have the most advanced stormwater system in the city since they built a new building, and I'm quite confident, although I wouldn't bet my life on it, that they maintain all their stormwater on their site. Why would they be called out specifically?
Sam, may I answer that? No, I may as well go up. And
We talked about this a lot during the task force meeting, so go ahead. Come on up.
Can you hear me? Am I?
Yes.
As you know, the elementary school has two catch basins, two fairly large catch basins. The one on nearest the street runs into the one near Newbold Square. And the riser on the one at Newbold Square is really high. It'll take a 100-year storm for that to overflow. But if it does overflow, it'll have to overflow into our storm system, our storm sewer system. Maybe that's not an answer.
I think when that day comes, the city's got bigger problems than the bit of water that the schools put into the lake.
Yes,
I think it'll be up to your chest.
I'll be standing right beside you.
So, I mean, I just, the level of detail amazes me, and yet, I guess another question is that, am I to understand that the city currently has property-by-property data to implement this?
Yes, we do.
You know exactly what well, not exactly.
I don't, but
what my property.
it's available.
The property by property, how much?
Yeah.
Okay.
There was a study that just came out in August of 2022 by a Dr. DeLiberty at the University of Delaware, and she did a random sampling. She had 242 spots where she checked to make sure that the GIS data was absolutely correct, and it was like 90-some%. So we're thinking that these one-by-one adjustments, probably we can do it. The elementary school is going to have a very small stormwater fee. It's just a token thing as far as I'm concerned. I talked about it with Bruce. That riser empties in through Newbold Square's storm system. So in a 100-year storm, it might work, but maybe not, maybe never. But you and I will probably be gone.
Well, okay. I guess the other thing that struck me in this report and your comments were that gravel surfaces are not included. In my experience, and it's not insignificant, that what's seen on the surface is not a good indication of the perviousness of a surface. Obviously, and I will concede that concrete, asphalt are impervious, but a lot of dirt surfaces are not. And I would point you to something you all should be familiar with, and that's Grove Park. I would guess that the runoff from that park is tremendous compared to what the actual paved surfaces are because of the uses that it's been put to. It is compacted to the point where there ain't no water that goes through a good part of that soil, and it has to run off somewhere. So to say that clamshells and stone and all these other things are pervious is false in my, because unless they're really constructed with a deep stone base and what have you, they're not going to function to park on unless they are compacted. And if they're compacted, they don't absorb.
We're going to have pervious, impervious ordinance we need to have one, and we'll have one within the next year. And we'll talk about natural versus obviously pervious and all kinds of other permutations of
I just was
perviousness.
going on the data or what was submitted today. Thank you.
Say it again, I didn't get that.
I said I just was commenting on what was presented today, not what's to come.
Yep, you got that right, thank you.
Suzanne, if you'd introduce yourself and remind us of your relationship to the city, including that you are a member of the task force, please.
Right. Suzanne Good, 1 Grove Street, and I was on the 13-member task force. I will note that I was among the second group, the less favored group to have been chosen. So, and I had when the task force initially formed, there were a few others like myself who were given trepidation by the considerable implementation costs and by the fact that some of the data we would need would have to be cobbled together or wasn't available at present. But then all I can conclude is that sort of groupthink takes over. And once the majority was in favor of this impact fee, those who had some doubts went over to the majority view. So the report you presented acted as though it was a unanimous decision to be in favor of this impact fee, but I was an outlier for reasons that I think, that I want to explain. I am absolutely in favor of spending what looks like between $1 and $1.5 million per year for the foreseeable future, possibly longer than 10 to 15 years out, because I do believe the aging infrastructure, the fact that there is more stormwater runoff necessitates that we enlarge the pipes, that in some cases we replace some completely collapsed pipes. But the reason I'm very worried about the implementation costs are partly because I did a literature search of other communities which have implemented these, and they're not trivial. The government administration in this case required, we do have a data set, I guess from 2016, but not published until 2018, and people on the task force were confident that someone in City Hall, or maybe again the services of a consultancy like Christine's firm AECOM, would have to go to look at every blueprint which has been submitted to building and licensing since 2016, including people who've put on additions or made modifications to their property. And I'm thinking of the approximately, 3,400 parcels? Is that approximately right? I'd say well over 10% of them have had either major, like razing to the ground of the existing property and complete rebuilding, or additions. People are constantly enlarging their houses in this town. I mean, so that was one of my problems. And the very complex appeals process which has been proposed is going to necessitate more attorney fees in this town. And I'm looking at the tree code and why our city solicitor, Mr. Mandalis, now has to have an assistant represent the city. We're gonna have a sort of a second level of administration for this stormwater impact fee that we now have for the tree code, which I think is not a good way to manage things. Then I was very concerned that because of the way that it's difficult to do a tiered rate structure in this case, because we're just looking at the impact of a property's stormwater runoff. So this will have the greatest financial impact on full-time residents for whom this impact fee will not be tax deductible. Whereas landlords who are renting out their houses can deduct it on their Schedule E, and of course commercial property owners can deduct this as yet another business expense. So that disadvantages the residents. I also had an issue, you'll see in the draft that there are 3 proposals. One's this 39, maybe this 3961 split, but one's just operating and maintenance costs to be borne by this impact fee, and one's for 100% to be borne. But either way, it doesn't matter whether we go with the lowest assessment on property owners or the very highest, you're gonna need this huge administrative burden. And it turns out that your firm has been working for the city since 2020. And the way this is headed, I think it might be almost in perpetuity because there will be tweaking of it. There are thoughts of having various credits available. I tried to ask several times, are we envisioning that a half-time city employee will need to be hired to manage this task? We do have a full-time arborist. So to me, that's a cautionary tale that it turns out it takes a lot of labor hours to get a program like this to, up and running and then sort of functioning. If you have people coming in confused about it and wanting to know if they jackhammer out their concrete driveway, how much money will they actually save per year if that's now considered pervious? So I'm very concerned that we're going down a path, we're throttling down this path thinking this is a better way. But I always thought, once I saw the implementation costs, I kept an open mind until I saw the implementation costs, that this $1 to $1.5 million a year should be raised through a bump in our very low property taxes and the majority of it taken from the general fund, but with an eye to raise user fees like parking in some substantial way. Instead of raising parking fees, we're about to spend what looks like $200,000 on a consultant to guide us as to what to do, whereas we could have raised parking fees and the length of the parking season in time for May 15th this year, but we chose not to. So those are my thoughts, and I appreciate your appointing me, Mr. Mayor, and I certainly learned a lot about groupthink more than anything else. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. In reference to a response to your introduction, yes, we have a democracy. No, our committees, commissions, boards, and committees do not always agree, and dissent is fine. So we appreciate your serving on that committee. Anybody else, members of the public, would like to speak? Jan, reintroduce yourself, please.
Jan Conacy, 42 Oak Avenue. I just want to point out to Suzanne that we did discuss alternate ways to fund, and we did make a recommendation that not all the funding come from the residents of Rehoboth Beach, but that we look at alternative sources of funding. Janice Miller, who was on our committee, is I don't know, they call them commissioners or council people.
She's a council member.
Council member in Fairfax City, Virginia, and they implemented this a stormwater utility fee there. And one of the things that we talked about at a meeting, and I don't know whether Suzanne was at the meeting or not, was looking at alternative ways of funding. So the residents, because we do contribute to it, but the visitors, the rental licenses, and I think our last meeting, second to last meeting, unfortunately Kevin got COVID, so, but Kevin had said that he would put together a plan of looking at all of the funding that we get from people who come to town. From simple things like parking to rental licenses to hotel taxes to whatever, and see if there was a way that you could put a small fee on each one of those things or multiple of those things, and that money would go into the stormwater utility fee. It would be earmarked from the beginning. And the easiest thing I can think of, which is add $1 an hour to the parking fee, and all that money goes to the stormwater utility. That sense then would bring the cost down to the residents of Rehoboth Beach, because a lot of our residents, as we all know, really don't live here, and they don't even use their home, their investment properties, and there's more and more of them, and they can deduct that tax. So I think that Suzanne may have missed that meeting, but that was a final recommendation.
No, not an argument, but just briefly.
If you do it short, remember, we've got another presentation to make.
I understand, but since Jan specifically named me, of course I'm aware there was going to be cost sharing in the 3 different proposals. In fact, all but one, well, the 2 of the 3 has some sharing between the property
We'll
owners and
discuss that
everyone
in a
else.
little bit.
So I think we still have, at the end of the day, what you have to decide is whether it's a good idea to separate this and put either whatever it is, 61%, 1/3, or 100% of the both infrastructure and operating and maintenance costs in this impact fee. Of course, it would be great, as Jan has mentioned, and I'm fully aware of, if maybe only 1/3 of it were funded on the property owners and the residual 2/3 were raised through the general fund. There was talk of getting grants. I hear a lot of talk of getting grants, but it ends up being a trivial portion of the expenditure of any program I've ever seen in this city. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Any other members of the public? If not, I want to remind everybody that this is an introductory discussion. It will not end here, and it will be back in front of us. So again, will be ample opportunity for additional public input in the future. With that, Jay, the next part of our presentation is of fee mitigation options. And Stormwater Utility Task Force Chair Commissioner Jay Lagree is going to give his presentation on fee mitigation options.
Mayor, could I just ask
Yes.
2 questions related to Table 2 on page 10, which is up there?
Yes, and forgive me, I meant to come back to this table to see if commissioners had anything further. So I will do that after Ed's questions and before Jay continues.
So Suzanne brought up and I think Sam Cooper brought up a couple things that I just want to follow up on. On this table, Kevin, was legal expenses
Let them bring that up.
proposed at all?
I don't believe we looked at legal fees.
And does the personnel,
No, in the spreadsheet of costs.
Table 2 on page 10?
Fees to cover the development of the stormwater ordinance, or?
More, my guess is more with the appeals process. Yeah. So that was, okay. And on the personnel expense, does that include new staff or that's just existing staff time?
We just looked at existing. And we didn't, I don't think we forecast an increase in staff.
And on the capital expenses, I noticed that the Lake Gerard accretion project is not included. Is that because is that FY24? Is that why?
That's correct.
And then, as noted, the last time that we got GIS data was in 2016. When's the next time that is scheduled to happen?
As I said a little bit ago, Liberty, the University of Delaware, did a random study on the 27, I thought it was 2017.
27 compared to 2016.
Yeah, and she found that it was extremely accurate. She had like over 250 random points.
I understand, but
So the accuracy is probably would hold up.
I understand that, but things change over time. So are we getting that refreshed every 10 years or 5 years or no?
That's something that can be considered during the implementation phase, but that University of Delaware study did compare from 2007 to 2016. And there was a 0.25% change in the overall percent impervious surface within the city. They looked at other places in Delaware as well, and City of Rehoboth had the lowest change of impervious surface. What time period was that? 2007 to 2016, comparing the impervious surface between those 2 points. And they found there was hardly much of an increase.
It was extremely accurate.
All right, you answered my question. Thank you.
How do I get my thumb drive up here?
Well, I don't think it answers mine. Would that not bring us to all the development redevelopment of properties since 2016 would not be accurately represented, or am I wrong about that?
It sounds like they're going to do that. It'll be a manual process. They'll look at all of the permits since
I see.
2016.
Okay, thank you.
Is that correct?
Right.
Thank you, Ed.
So are there any other questions by commissioners before we go to Jay's presentations?
None for me. I was very interested, and I thank all the public who got up and spoke, because every single question that I had, they either raised it or alluded to it, so that's very helpful to inform the discussion for today. Thank you.
Thank you. Jay, go ahead.
What I'd like to do is continue to answer questions that the commissioners have until we decide, or until we indicate that we're going to move forward with the utility. We can't do any outreach because we don't have a commitment to go ahead. We really need to start doing outreach yesterday, and that's what I hope to do. I would like to find out how we want to fund this utility if we decide to go forward, and that's something we're going to talk about. And the task force was very, very adamant about recommending that we start work on a impervious surface ordinance, and that we begin a comprehensive stormwater management investigation plan. And I can tell you that we're going to do that. That's ready to launch as soon as. Oh, I maybe
Turn it into a slideshow.
Windows guy. Yeah, view. How's that, Susan? How's that, Susan? Thank you. Thanks for asking. And I want us to talk about mitigation. I want the public to leave this room thinking that we're going to look at funding and that we're going to look at mitigation, and we'll talk about that as we go along. And I'm going to also talk about a timeline. We have to set a timeline. And so it's up to the commissioners. Yes, Commissioner Sharp.
Commissioner Lagree, you've said a couple of times that we were not able to begin outreach until you get a better sense of consensus, I believe.
Until I get more consensus.
So what is the first step in the outreach, and why has it been prevented until this discussion today? Could you help me on that?
We don't even know if we're going to go for a utility. We couldn't get ahead of the commissioners. Go ahead,
If
Kevin.
I could just, I think you would acknowledge that in the last 6-8 months, Lynn has produced several public outreach things in general. Stormwater generalities, what you can do to mitigate, reduce, those kinds of things. We can't really target the benefits or drawbacks of a utility until you decide whether or not we want to even proceed in that direction. So we didn't want to go out and start advocating for development of a stormwater utility, because today you may say, man, this is BS, we don't really want to do this, just stop it, stop work. So this is kind of the check valve that if we don't want to proceed any farther, that we could stop without spending a lot more money developing the overall program. So she has done certainly some outreach, stormwater issues related, just not advocating for or against the development of a utility.
And I think I completely appreciate that. The nuance that I have is nothing more than an expression to the public, whether we go through with it or not. It's the answer to the question that I think came up from one of our public that's here today. Why do we need this? Answering the question why. Why is it so important to the city for the future as well as the present is a very nuanced piece to me that I'm very glad to hear we would really start to drill down on the specifics, moving from the generalities into the more specific issues.
You remember 1998 when the state told us we had to get out of the canal because we were dumping point source nutrients in there. That's sort of the beginning. You remember 2005 when Governor Minner had her tennis shoe events, and she and John Hughes walked into the bay out here. It's as far as they could go before they could not see their tennis shoes. You remember that in 2018, Evan lectured to us with presentations on resilient communities. The state of Delaware decided about that time that they wanted to have resilient communities. And resilient communities have a stormwater plan. We don't want to flood. And that's sort of where it got it, and turned into a mandate now. Yeah, that's why we are going toward a stormwater utility. And Title VII, Delaware Title VII of their rules and regulations on erosion and sediment, it's Regulation 5101. If you go in there on page 25, you'll see how they explain to us why we have to have a utility. Even the steps, they have 3 or 4 steps that we're going to have to do. If we refuse to have a stormwater utility, we get to look at, hey, I may have it here. We get to look at the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System with all their rules and regulations, because the state will mandate that. And then there's MS4, which is the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. The state will mandate that. Our city manager has lots of experience with what it takes to qualify and confirm and answer the regulations that MS4 has. It's much better for us to have a stormwater utility that's complete, that's comprehensive, and that one we can put into operation. And that's what I hope the commissioners will be doing this next year, is working on a stormwater utility, funding, mitigation, and if I have my way, the commissioners will make some big decisions every year at budget time. How much shall we allocate to the stormwater this year? Can we kick in $1 million? Probably not, or we might. Right now, the general fund is kicking in, probably close to $1 million every year when you count the maintenance and operation plus the capital improvements that we can afford. But 5101, rules and regulations, wants a city to have a stable means of funding for their stormwater plans, and they want it to be laid out in writing in black and white. And I think it's a good idea. I just want us to control it and not some MS4 regulations. I've gone on too far, and I'm sorry.
No, actually, what you just did, I think, illustrates my point, only possibly to me, which is you just rattled off the top of your head the institutional knowledge that you have about 1999 and 2005 that I would almost guarantee you there's an extraordinary amount of property owners that do not have that knowledge. So being able to understand from where we came to where we want to go now is an integral part of my opinion, of outreach, so that there's no question in our taxpayers' minds and our homeowners' minds, even if they are investors or whatever the situation might be, that this is a very smart and needed project, and getting into the nuances of how it's going to be paid for and all of the other things. I don't think that's what you're looking for today. I think you're looking for the support that this is the way we need to go for the future.
Yes, exactly right. But I need to say, you mentioned one example that I have not been able to mention in the presentation of the ones that I've given so far. I mean, people yawn and nod until you mention funding. And everybody suddenly wakes up and they're interested in what you're having to say. And that's another reason I'm going to ask you guys to give me a little bit of a hint going forward about what we're going to do, what we'd like to do, and how we think we would like to do it. I really appreciate your comments. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Markert?
I'm just trying to establish here, just in terms of what is needed at this moment, and obviously I think this this presentation is, if it does make it to the eyes and ears of the public and allows them to sort of, begin to grasp the situation. But I think if it is indeed needed, that we all have to make some level of commitment that, I'm in on this, or I'm still, not quite feeling informed about this or whatever. I mean, I think we ought to be able to sort of assemble that statement, and it obviously, I'm speaking for myself, it's obvious to me that we do, and it's just a matter of like how we kind of grease the gears and make the whole apparatus work in order for this to happen. And I value the comments from the public, in particular from Suzanne. It's like how Suzanne Good, in terms of how do we do this, And there's a myriad of ways that we can do it, and the presenter also described that, with various different municipalities and how they do it. But in my lifetime, and just in my recent lifetime, it just seems like it's starting to rain more. I mean, if there's any more obvious thing, I think we're seeing the effects of climate change, or however, and we are seeing more, fierce weather events and so forth and so on, and we have a greater vested interest in the infrastructure, not only the infrastructure of this town, but like the value of the property in this town and so forth and so on. And I think we have to take some action in order to be able to sort of, confront that. So, I'm not saying that we're bound and determined to do this, but I think we're bound and determined to kind of figure out the most equitable way to do this. And I hope we proceed in a timely fashion and to a schedule in order to do that. So I'm just trying to move this along, but and I see, and I if I have any kind of head, it's usually with regard to like an equitable financial system in order to accomplish this without, killing ourselves, trying to figure out, who's got, X number of square footage on their lot and how big their roof is and all that kind of stuff. I mean, obviously we can figure all that out, but I would venture towards some system that is not too unwieldy, that maybe has like a base value that you then add or delete various aspects of your property in order to come out of that, which will dial in your particular fee that you have to contribute to this thing. But I would not make it so onerous that we have to really, there's got to be a sort of either through tiering or through a basic discount, or a thing. But I would say, generally speaking, the responsibility that I think there's sort of like a general responsibility that we all have as property owners, both commercial and residential, with adjustments that can be easily kind of figured out. So you can kind of, I mean, I don't think people like really beat their property tax to death, simply because the consequence of it is so minuscule. Like if I have whatever I have, it's going to cost me $25 or $50 more or $100, whatever. I don't think everybody's going to sweat that. But in this particular situation, there might be some larger swings. But I would say generally we're trying to fund the things we have to do, and that's going to be a shared expense, and I think we can kind of work that out in some kind of equitable way. So I'm sorry I spoke so long, but that's where I'm at.
The equitable part of it is very clear, and we heard that on the very first day of that our consultant talked to us. At the time, it was Dave Athey. You cannot win in court if you tie the stormwater fee to taxes. They lose every time. Mm-hmm. And on the back, the last page of that green of the presentation are a bunch of references. We have all those references. And the second one, I think, down is Black and Vetch. No, yeah, second one's Black and Vetch. They tell you in there just how many times stormwater fees or utilities are challenged and how many times they win and how many times they lose. If you'll base your measurement on square feet of impervious surface, you'll just almost never lose. It will hold up in any court because it's equitable, it's measurable, it's defendable. And one of our task force members was Janice Miller, who, as we mentioned a second ago, is a council on the council in Fairfax City. And I handed you a credit manual, and that is Fairfax City's credit manual. And it's worked really well. They're about a year or two ahead of us, and that their credit program has worked really well. She said that they didn't have nearly the number of folks requiring credit or appeals or incentives than they thought they were going to have. So that was interesting. By the way, Fairfax City uses the exact same rate structure that we do. They have 500 square feet of impervious surface. It's like your water bill. You open up your water bill, and on every 1,000 gallons that you use, you pay a fee. And it's a simple thing to do, and that's why we got it in those measurable, easily understood structure for our rate. And I didn't mean to talk about that, but that's what we did. Does anybody have any questions so far before I start talking about money?
No, go ahead.
Yes, Suzanne. Can you hold it to 1.5 minutes?
Suzanne Good, 1 Grove Street, and I worked on the task force under Jay. Just your mention of Janice Miller, who's a friend of mine, great person, and who was involved with Fairfax City's implementation. If you were to look online, there was a lot of pushback in Fairfax City, but in the end, because the fee isn't nearly as onerous as even the lower two that we're proposing, where we don't have this impact fee cover 100% of operations, maintenance, and infrastructure. I'm worried that you thought it was so simple in Fairfax City. That's not what I'm seeing online. And some communities, as you know, as we learn, Staunton, Virginia, among others, after going through, spending a lot of money on a consultant, then rejected
Your
the
1.5
idea of
minutes
a
have
stormwater
expired.
impact fee.
You've expired. I've talked to the director of public works in Fairfax City, and really smart guy, had some really great ideas for us. He gave us the names of some consultants that they had used, and their plan is working really, really well, and more power to them. Let's talk about that. It costs, Rehoboth Beach has 8.34 million square feet of private impact stormwater surface. And that's not it. That was in our first lecture from Dave Athey. We have 5.7 million square feet of public right-of-way. And we have a little tiny sliver of other less than 100,000 square feet of odds and ends. And if we want to generate enough money to pay for all the expenses that you see on page 10 of that green handout, which is her final report, everybody in this room suddenly has taken note, their attention's up, and they got their pencils out. All you need to do is talk about money. And the $443 is what the 5.7 million square feet will take to pay for all the expenses and all of the maintenance of that first year. And that's all being paid by that 8.34 million square feet of privately owned square footage. And that's where she got the $443 from. When you look and see if the city can pay for the public part of the necessary expenses to maintain a stormwater system, your bill for the private people. Now this, and I asked you a while ago to make sure you looked at that chart we had there, and you noticed that the most common size is 3,000 square feet of impervious surface. And that's what this $443 is figured from. And that's what the $251 is figured from if the city pays 40% for all the right-of-way. And the third option is for the city to pay capital and the private people pay the O&M. And that O&M, if you look on that, I think it's in the middle of the page where we have the totals for O&M, it'll run you very close to $600,000 a year. And if the private people pay for that, privately owned property pays for that, you're going to come into $225 a year. The other day, I took my car to Dover, to the Honda place. They changed my transmission oil. They adjusted the flange on one of my brakes that was scratching a little bit. And they put a new hood latch, $721. Has anybody else had that kind of experience taking your car in? It's horrible. Try to take your dog to the vet. We had a puppy that had to have a tooth pulled, a little bit over $2,000. You just go crazy.
You're a dentist.
And I'm a daggone dentist. But if I can't afford $225 a year, I ought not to live in Rehoboth. And so I think it's just a matter of what size mitigation we want to go for. Yeah, Bunky, go ahead. I'm going to talk a little bit what Jan said in a minute.
Question. Is there an expectation that our property tax would be affected by implementing this in terms, I'm thinking, could be reduced as a result, depending on which one of these, of the three funding mechanisms would be? Like, is any of this displaced, or
No.
like basically already exists in the budget, or no?
No, not that part.
Okay.
But it depends on where we bring the money out of the general fund. We get over $2 million from tax on rental houses. We're going to get close to $2 million this year on our hotel tax. We're making what, $4.1 million last year on parking? We could double property tax and not even get enough to pay for this. So property tax is not, I think that was your question.
That's what I'm saying.
Property tax is not the answer because it's not uniform. Some people pay more than others and might have the same amount of impervious surface. So
I mean, we pay $300 for refuse pickup,
yeah,
okay? Think of it in those terms.
yes. Something else that we do, we charge 2% for new construction on the permit fee. We could add another % to that and probably pay most of the city part of most of the money that we're going to get out of the general fund if we decide to mitigate for that. There are a lot of things we could do. We could put $1 on parking meter. We could do. There's a bunch of things we could do. We could, as long as we spread it out uniformly, which means that we would take it out after it came into the general fund, and we could do that. We could take part of it out of that. We could take part of it out of the parking money that we make. It's an easy thing to do as long as we keep it in the general fund, and that's what Bert's recommending. Our CPA is recommending that we keep this money in the general fund so we can move in and out as we need to. You may decide next year that you don't want the city to put in so much money, and you can do that if it's general fund, but it's hard to take it out of the enterprise funds, water and sewer. But This is just one option. We could do a bunch of things. I think Jan said something about earmarking. Our accountant people don't like the earmark, but we could do that. You're the commissioners. You can decide to do anything you want. You can decide not to do this utility if you want. It's, Tim, go ahead.
So that, this may relate to what Commissioner Sharp had mentioned, but as you're speaking and talking about the fee, I think last year, was the beach closed 3 times, 2 times, 3 times?
It was never closed, Commissioner. We issued beach advisories.
Beach advisories
that
for
the
the water.
bacteria level was increased.
That was blamed on stormwater runoff, I think.
That's correct.
And so if I'm a resident and I'm now being charged $432 or whatever the number is,
You don't want the beach
is the beach
closed.
going to, am I going to have these warnings that we can't go in the water because of stormwater runoff? In other words, how will this fee mitigate us having the issue of having tainted water in the ocean?
It's not going to happen next year or the year after, but eventually a good stormwater management plan will keep the nutrients down. In the case of our warnings, they were from enterics, and that was close, and it happened after a darn rainstorm. And I shouldn't be going into this. Their measuring techniques are so precise that if a dog poops on the beach, it'll set the alarms off.
Right. But I think for me, that's part of the outreach, to let residents
you
know
bet.
that if there is a fee for this, that it's going to help keep the beaches cleaner or keep the lakes cleaner, whatever. But that was my question on that. Thank you.
Well, interestingly, I think every time we had an advisory, DNREC put out a public notice that indicated it was due to goals and
They thought so, yeah, warm-blooded
not
animals.
not human
Yeah.
impacts
They-
as much as animal
Yeah.
impacts.
They really can't, when the grab samples that DNREC does are just colony-forming units of enterics per every 100 millimeter of sample, and they put nutrients in there and they make the little bugs grow, and then they count how many colonies there are, and you can't tell. In order to tell if it's, all you can tell of it is that it's warm-blooded. If you're going to tell a dog from a seagull, it's tough. You have to do a genetic analysis. It costs like crazy. It can be done. So what they're doing now is just taking enteric samples from our outfalls. For some reason, they're not getting Silver Lake outfall, but they start at, well, the five downtown that we have, which includes Lake Gerard, but it's just a simple sample. May I mention the latest report we got in? I'm sorry, this is Kevin's bellywhack. We just got a report from the United States Army Corps of Engineers, who've been doing a year-long study on Silver Lake, and they just finished it and they sent it to us. One of the things they're recommending is that we do a lot more testing and a lot more modeling now they were only concerned of Silver Lake, but of Silver Lake. And so I suspect that when you have the stormwater ordinance written, you will probably mandate more testing. We really need to test. And there are others that are talking about that. So I think that's going to happen. That's really going to happen. And I think that answers Tim's question. We can tell the people truthfully that we're going to do a lot more testing as we go along because of our stormwater plan, and we're going to know a lot more about the quality of our lakes, which is important. Ed.
Commissioner, thank you, and I agree with Commissioner Bennett. The fact that we've had advisories the past year, and I think it was quite a bit this last year, 5 or 6, if was it 3? In any event, that needs to be part of the outreach.
I think it's great. I think you're right.
The reality is those have an economic impact to our city. If someone that's planning to come here for the day sees an advisory that they can't swim, they may not drive and pay to park, and all of that could potentially have an impact on the city. So that's an important aspect. But going back to the funding piece here, so you're saying that this will not be an enterprise fund. Is that because?
No, that's true. The enterprise, go ahead.
Is that because Bert doesn't want it, or that's what the task force is recommending?
If we set up a stormwater enterprise fund that's an enterprise fund, we have a hard time. It has to be really isolated, and we have a hard time taking money from the general fund, which is what we're going to have to do if we kick in $500,000-600,000 from several revenue sources and moving that into the enterprise fund. We
Okay,
can move it around the general fund a lot easier, and Bert has a lot easier time explaining all that when he does.
So the recommendation is that this will remain in the general fund and
Yes.
be its own department?
Yes, that's
cetera.
true.
Okay.
It'll have its own cost center. It will be in the general fund, but it'll all be transparent when we move money from the general fund into the stormwater fund. That'll be very transparent, and
Gotcha.
we can always say, we'll always know.
Understood. And on the, in this topic, there's 3 other presentations. Are you going through each of those presentations, or are they there just for reference?
I'm lost.
In the support.
In the support document, there's a phase 2 water sampling, a Delaware coastal communities impervious surface coverage final report. Are these, you're not going through each one of those?
No,
They're
I
just-
won't. I'm just gonna talk about the implementation of the stormwater utility.
Okay, good. I will save my questions, the rest of them for the end then.
Any other commissioners have anything to say before we go to the public? We'll go back to, I've got a couple things to say, but we can do that later. Any members of the public like to continue conversation, feel free to go retroactive and say anything you'd like. We are time limited, but I haven't cut off anybody yet, so. Bruce,
Again,
the
Bruce
routine,
Williams, New
reintroduce
Old
yourself
Square
if you
on the
would.
task force. I just want to reinforce where Commissioner Lagree went in answering Commissioner Sharp's question that led to putting up the NPDES and MS4 on the screen. My experience with stormwater utilities goes back to 1996 when I was on the Tacoma Park, Maryland City Council, and we implemented a stormwater utility, one of the first in the country, and have made modifications since then. And what we've continued to have to do, just as other communities, including those in Delaware, have to do, is deal with the constant march of requirements for MS4 permits going to smaller and smaller communities. And I've served for 15 years on the Local Government Advisory Committee on the Chesapeake Bay and have worked with communities in Delaware that drain to the bay, not the ocean, including the lakes of Laurel. And they're constantly dealing with what are the requirements that the federal government comes with and DENREC has to work with for MS4 permits for communities. And I think it's admirable if Rehoboth deals with this ahead of being required to do it, because it's going to come down to smaller communities such as Rehoboth. So that's the reason for setting up a utility.
Thank you, Bruce. Anybody else? David? Identify yourself and your relationship to the city, please.
Thank you, Dave Diefendorfer, city resident. I just wanted to say that there's been a lot of great work done on this by the committee and the consultants. I just want to say that I'm in favor of something like this. The devil will be in the details of how you figure out, pervious versus impervious, or you drain into the city, or you put it in a rain barrel, et cetera, et cetera. But I just want to say that I am definitely in favor of this. We've got to protect the environment as best we can, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, David.
Anybody else? Suzanne, come ahead.
Suzanne, before you start, let me answer Bruce. Last night I got online and I downloaded the self-assessment package for MS4. Each city has to do a self-assessment. There were 26 chapters in that download. It was days and days of work. And all of us can take a look. We can get online and download that same horrible package, but it's exactly what our city manager says, and it's exactly as Bruce said it. Thank you. You can't repeat anything you've said before.
Suzanne Good, 1 Grove Street, and on the task force. So I want to iterate just my strong advocacy to do all of this major capital project work on the stormwater system, but that I'm very fearful, and I know Jay was involved with the water rates where we ended up with flat water and sewer treatment rates in this city, that if you do hurtle down this road, especially if you do the 100% funding through this impact fee, you're sort of setting a second precedent to be what's called regressive by most people, that you're putting so much of the burden on property owners in a city where on a July 4th day, if you have 40,000 visitors, the property owners are almost a minuscule proportion of those generating wastewater, trash, and everything that's polluting our water. So anyway, I appreciate that you're considering it, and I hope you will ask very specific questions, including whether a new half-time or potentially full-time employee like our city arborist will be required to administrate this new impact fee. That question was left unanswered, and that the consultant the services of the consultant may be needed in perpetuity at the way I'm looking at this because of the complex nature of reassessments, appeals, et cetera. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Anybody else from the public? If not, we'll come back up here. I just have a few random comments to make. One is that I recognize that there's a stormwater problem that needs to be managed. We have 640-ish catch basins, and every one of them drains to a water body, whether it's the lake, either lakes, the canal, or the Atlantic Ocean. And very few, percentage-wise, have filters on them, very few. And so that can lead to problems and lead to advisories for problems with contamination. Also, the stormwater problem exhibits itself in what I call puddling. This potential project for Cookman and Kent and everything, to me, is more of a puddling problem, rain that accumulates, puddles for days and maybe a week or so after. And that's a different kind of problem than on the third block of Philadelphia Avenue, where the impervious driveways have been added and have caused flooding in individual yards. So we have different situations here. We do have a drain marker program. Most of the drains, I think we got a few to catch up on the Lake Avenue Phase 2 project here that are still outstanding. But we have those little metal markers that nice citizens volunteered and installed years ago. And so we're trying to educate on trying to avoid pollution. We did a DENREC video that I've been disappointed I don't think it's ever gotten on our website. So I think there's some education in waves that we've done, and we can improve on that, I believe. I'm mindful that at one point many years ago, or I don't know, 5 years ago probably, the ribbon driveways started proliferating. And I think that was because that coincided with a time where we increased the required natural from, I believe, 40% to 50%. And so all of a sudden we were requiring more natural and therefore getting some more absorption out of that. So that was kind of personally, I'm leaning toward. I can see the need and the value in a stormwater utility. Somebody said the devil's in the details. For me, a component of it, if we did it, would have to be incentives. What in fact, that maybe the only reason I could go for it is if we have incentives built into it so that we are encouraging our constituents to initiate best management practices. Christine mentioned rain barrels, and there's others that need to be articulated and out there. Commissioner Bennett, I agree with your initial question on the discrepancy between Lewis fees and Rehoboth fees, because Lewis fees, $6 a month times 12 is $72 a year, and we are minimally 3 times, and possibly or likely 6 times the cost of that. So I'd like a little more research into what is the discrepancy there? I assume it comes down to that one chart on costs and what we're doing, but a little more detail would be good in my book. As far as the beach advisories, I think a lot of this will help, but I don't know that it will relieve 100% the potential for closure advisories because of the animal situation and on the beach. So again, I'm looking for additional public input in the near future. I don't have in my mind a definitive date for when this will be on the agenda again. I want it to be out there in the media. I would like to solicit more public input before we come back. And maybe, would you mind if I asked, you've articulated what our next step is. Would you mind if I asked Kevin to re-articulate? Our next step when we come together will be to determine what? Do we want to determine that we are indeed going to pursue a stormwater utility and that will be formed? Or is there an intermediary step there?
Mayor, in my mind today or at a future meeting soon, I would hope, the board would just say, yes, we want to take it, we want to continue the process. And the next step in the process would be then to go ahead and start developing the implementation plan. And that's where all these details would get refined, the numbers will get refined. We'll look at various options if the board wants to look at, rather than just all fee-funded, if you wanted to take some off of some of these other options that Commissioner Lagree talked about. But in essence, at a soon upcoming meeting, to just say, yes, we want to continue, or no, just stop here. As you know, we have money in the budget, in the FY24 budget, to continue with that. So we put money in for the development of the implementation plan. But we've said there's no need to spend that if the board wants to just say, let's stop now. We don't want to spend additional money developing it. So we would like to get it in fairly near future so that we can implement it per that timeline that we had earlier on, so that we could take the next 8 months or so to develop that implementation plan, if that's the desire. If it's not, then we just say no, and we'll fold that up and put that money back into the general fund for another purpose.
Okay, so between both of you, what I'm hearing is that there needs to be additional conversation. Again, I earlier suggested that we not necessarily do it today, but we wait until the next meeting to be able to receive additional public input. And then rather than seeking to say, yes, go ahead and implement a stormwater utility, the question is, do we come to agreement that we want them to move forward with an additional implementation plan, which will answer some more questions and present a program, at which case, after that, we would then propose the vote to go forward of it. So there's that intermediary step that I wanted to articulate here.
That's my understanding, Mayor.
Until you indicate to me that we're going to propose, we have consensus, we have an inclination to go forward, I have to keep my mouth shut. I can't do outreach. So the sooner you tell me that we think we'll go ahead and go, and I can't imagine us not going for a utility. I cannot imagine in my mind.
But see, I'm still hearing two different things.
But if
The,
you, well, I'm telling you what my problem is. My problem is I can't do outreach until we committed to go forward, or until we give a consensus, or until we have reasonable thoughts that we're going to go ahead and go forward with the implementation. I'm not going to go tell the public that we're going to have a stormwater utility if we're not going to have a stormwater utility.
well, and again, I think I'm hearing two different things, but that our next step is to determine, do we want to indeed move forward and have you all create the implementation plan? Not, we want you to move forward and implement it. Period. There's an intermediary step. Is that?
I would just say in my mind, Mayor, that we still would need to come back to the commissioners to say, once we develop what that true rate is, we owe that a vote, come back to the board and say, based upon all the implementation guidance we put together, the fee would be X. And then you get an opportunity to vote. I don't think we're asking you to approve a $440,
Yeah,
per
we're
stormwater billing unit today.
Well, then let's go with that plan.
Well, if we hold off until August or September or somewhere like that to make this vote to implement the stormwater utility, we can look at calendar year 25. We cannot possibly get it ready to go in a year, and we can't spend money on a implementation until we have a vote that we want to implement it.
Well, I don't know our calendar, but I would say within 2 to 4 weeks, likely we could have this back.
Great, if we could vote within 2 to 4 weeks on a forward-to-go implementation, I can get with the information director and we can have something ready to shoot by the time we say yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else?
But what are we voting on?
Bennett?
So I guess my question would be, isn't the question, do we want a stormwater utility, yes or no?
It sure is.
So
And
that's
we
the
haven't said
first-
yes yet.
Right, so that's the first thing. I don't think you guys should be spending a lot of time implementing something if we haven't even agreed we want a utility.
Precisely.
So, okay, thank you.
Well, I need a clarification, Mayor, from you, because I'm at a point today, because I thought we were going to try to give specific direction to keep this project moving today. If we were to put this on an agenda in May, for example, what other information would I have that I don't already have today?
Additional input from the public.
Okay, well,
Remember, this is our introductory discussion. This is the first time all those that are not on the task force have heard this. And it just follows our philosophy of introducing thing at one meeting and typically voting on another. Do it whatever the pleasure of the commissioners is. If they want to give direction today, then that's fine.
I just want to stake out my position that I can't yet come up with any reason that I wouldn't say yes. I'm certainly not a no. So if you need to be grappling with consensus, I'm on the yes side at the moment. And the devil really is in the details, which we were not going to take that up today, nor would we be taking that up in May. And I can certainly understand if you want to give the public some additional time to review, I guess, the same things that, they're the same documents plus today's meeting that were there this morning, right? So I'm a yes to keep moving, because I'm getting, I think we could be a lot more efficient by just staking out that what is our leaning today, and then if we want to wrap it up for this piece of it in May, I think that's reasonable.
Once Lynn gets our consensus, and once Chris hears our consensus, and once I get a chance to start talking to the public, our feedback from the public, I hope, is going to be intelligent, understanding, and be able to say, yes, they want to do it, or no, they don't. I think the outreach is a real important part of this, and I can't start without knowing that we're going to go forward. But, you know, excuse me, go ahead.
Commissioner Lagree, are you finished? Are we at the time of conclusion, comments, and questions? You're finished with your presentation?
I haven't done the timeline yet that we're going to give when we pass the baton to the city manager.
Do you want to finish the presentation and then we wrap it up with final questions and comments?
Yeah, you want to go ahead and finish?
Mm-hmm. If we make a decision today, it's on that chart up there. It's laid out what we have to do and where we have to go, and that's pretty much it. We get the recommendations today, and we try to get a Board of Commissioners consensus to move forward with the establishment, which I'm not sure, but the fee structure approval, the writing of the ordinance, communication campaign, that all comes, and the starting of the stormwater plan and the ordinance for impervious services, that all comes once I get the okay to go forward. And I think I'll get it from you people, it sounds like. I don't think anybody's against the utility. Am I missing somebody?
I hear a lot of silence.
Well,
I certainly,
then maybe my job's over.
I will say that I am 100% against the residents footing the whole bill. So that's where I start from.
Yeah.
But that's not the issue for today. I want to put a very precise point on this. What we're doing today is it will enable us to answer your question in a follow-up meeting.
And the mitigation part has to be a decision of the commissioners, as does the credit manual, as does all the incentives. Those will all be your decisions as the utility is being formed.
So, Commissioner Bennett, can I ask you a question? So, in my mind, I don't know that the residents are footing the entire bill because we have a lot of commercial property in town. It sounds like whether it's a residential property, commercial property, or city property, it's being split equally based on how much land there is and how much coverage there is on that land. So where do you feel like the residents would be footing the bill?
I'm thinking he met property owners.
Yeah.
So you're strongly advocating that.
No, the
a portion of
to me,
this-
$432 is too much.
Okay.
And so, but back to Commissioner Sharp's point is, I'm fine if we go ahead with a stormwater management utility, but I do want us to be a bit more creative as to how it's paid for, particularly when we look at other towns that have these. If Lewis is $72, I understand we have capital expenditures we have to have, but do we have $400 more per household in capital expenditures? So for me, I like the path forward. I don't think $432 per household is where I would land, and I would be dead set against that.
Gotcha.
So that's where I stand.
Understood. I've got just a couple questions. They don't have to be answered today, but maybe at the next meeting. And then I'll draw my thoughts to a conclusion. Before, you said that there would be we would not be doing a refresh of the GIS. But looking at the table 2, the expenditures, there is a line item called GIS updates, and there's about $16,000 to $18,000 each year. What is that then?
This is an estimate. Just estimate what we think might be coming down the line, and of course we have to keep everything up to date as we go forward into the future, and that has to be funded.
That would be the manual updates of someone in our city staff looking at permits in the previous year and updating the GIS data?
You're asking questions that are so detailed that I'm not even sure I can answer.
Understood. And is it fair to understand that what you're proposing is a phase 1, and that phase 2, actually the development of a comprehensive stormwater management plan, is going to happen somewhere in this timeline?
We are going to work on the utility that says we can set up a fee for stormwater, and the stormwater management plan is something also we're going to work on.
Right, so
As-
it's fair to say that phase one is setting up a fee to, one, deal with immediate capital expenditures, but also establish a comprehensive stormwater management plan. Is that fair?
Those will be two different consultants, and this man to your right might be able to answer it.
If you recall, in accordance with the passing of the budget, a comprehensive stormwater management plan is required to be done separate of the stormwater utility action. That is ongoing. Director of Public Works and I will be getting with a consultant to begin the process of that.
Okay, so there are two separate projects, and this fee is not going to fund this comprehensive stormwater management
The
plan.
comprehensive stormwater management plan was needed to continue this process at a later date. When you start looking at major stormwater projects, infrastructure, rehabilitation, things, you need that stormwater management plan to help inform and influence future projects that Kevin and the Public Works Department will either do themselves or process out for other consultants. and
I guess I
organizations.
just need a yes or no answer. Is this fee funding a comprehensive stormwater management plan?
No.
Okay.
My apologies. I
No,
should have
no.
started off with that, like, no,
I
it's
just tried,
separate, and
because it
one's
is-
needed for the other. My
It
apologies.
is listed on this as an expenditure, but it's blank. So that's why I just wanted to
Okay.
be clear.
My
So
apologies.
that was a moving target. Obviously, we started this process back in 2021. I think it was pre-COVID, right? So we developed a 5-year CIP that was in the books at that point in time, and as it's progressed to this point, that 5-year CIP has changed over time. So that was in the original one from the year ago, and now because it got funded this year, it's to zero on the table.
Understood. And I'll just say that in my mind, this, and I've said it publicly before, the cart was before the horse. I don't know how we have a utility if we don't yet have a plan and know what we need to fund. But I understand how they're kind of going forward concurrently, and
My plan is that you will have voted on a stormwater management plan before you vote on the utility. Does that make sense? I think that we need to do that. We need to get the cart back behind the horse. And we signed that contract in I believe it was January of 2020 with AECOM. And then we had the pandemic. So there's been a lot of reasons that things have changed.
And this question, don't need to answer it today, but one, I'm just going to throw out a scenario. I had friends that were going to build a new restaurant on a vacant lot. My understanding is there's somewhere in the code that for any new commercial building construction, that not one drop of stormwater, there cannot be one drop of runoff. And it was going to be cost prohibitive to do all of this studies and design for them to move forward with the project. So if that is in an ordinance in the building code, and it is the case, will there be any consideration for properties that self-contain everything and there is no runoff, if that was thought about or talked about in the task force at all?
I don't know of any place in the ordinance that the scenario you described exists.
Okay.
Please bring it to me and show it to me.
I will do research.
And-
It's something I heard. I don't know. I didn't look at the code.
Yeah, do that, and then and number two, you just heard the conversation with Mayor Cooper about the elementary school. So there are situations that we're gonna have to take a look at and adjust, because they're not gonna add much stormwater except in a 100-year flood. So we need to look at that and see how much we're gonna, what kind of a fee we're gonna do and what kind of incentives we're gonna give. I suspect, as you know, the elementary school is a huge property, and their stormwater fees, if we go with, say, even half, if we go with the 225, their stormwater fees are going to be many thousands of dollars a year. So that'll have to be educated. That'll have to be brought down and to what's reasonable. And there are cases like that all over town. I do not know of any ordinance that says that everything has to be self-contained. You just can't do that.
Yeah, I don't know the,
I don't think
I
it's-
don't know the details. It's just something I heard. I'll bring it to a conclusion. Clearly, all of these, the expenditures that we have here, the capital projects, making sure our stormwater going out into the ocean and the lakes need to be clean. We need less of it because we are getting more. We need to encourage more natural area. All of these things need to happen. And I look at it from a fairness on how that's paid for. And having a utility where people are paying for how much runoff you have from a property, and you're paying for how you designed, a house or a building. It seems like the most equitable way to move forward is you're paying for how much runoff you're creating. And that seems, I'm not hearing anything that would, like Commissioner Sharp said, that I would say no to this moving forward. So if that helps give you consensus, I'm a yes.
Just having impervious, changing a driveway to pervious is going to take off a half of a billing unit off of your payment. And you can pay for the pervious driveway if in a few years. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I try to bring this to a conclusion. I think how I would summarize our next step would be to answer the question, do we want to move forward with an implementation plan, which would be the first step before we get to a point where we decide to vote on actually creating the stormwater utility. So do we want to move forward with an implementation plan? I've proposed that we put it off until the May workshop meeting to come to a conclusion. If others would want to do it today, then they need to speak up.
Mayor, I just kind of, no matter what we call this, it's a utility or what have you, trying to keep it simple in my mind, to me, it kind of parallels what we currently have with our drinking water and our wastewater. We have individual bills for that. We pay for that to maintain good drinking water and clean wastewater. We're currently updating the wells so that we would have a long-term drinking water for us. We're updating the wastewater treatment plant to maintain that for future generations. And as been mentioned here, we also, we know that there are larger houses being built and people expanding their houses, so that is creating, more and more pervious surface to deal with, more and more runoff. All of our commercial buildings that are built have zero lot lines, so there is, the way the code reads, there is no pervious surface design for that, so that's something to think about there. We talk about everybody on the backs of the residents, what have you, but we do supply our public restrooms, we do supply our foot showers, we water the beautiful plants that line the avenues in the commercial district, so all of those are costs that are minuscule in some regards, but they do add up. I think the beach advisories are something that certainly needs to be taken into consideration. I don't know that this addresses that, because I've always understood that the solution to the pollution is dilution. And if we were able to extend our outfalls further into the ocean, that would dramatically have an impact on those advisories that what happened. I, too, am supportive of moving forward with this. I do have a question, and I don't know if it needs to be addressed at this moment, but if I look at the report, on page 32, there are 10.1 recommendations, and there are some 15, 18 of them are, I guess. And I'm just curious if those are in any order of priority, or is there step one to get to step two type of thing, prioritization? Because it is mentioned in there, a citywide stormwater master plan should be completed prior to implementation of a stormwater utility. And then, and sort of disturbing to me, is the last point. Again, I don't know if they're prioritized or not, but it says the last point on all this, public outreach should be included in the implementation phase and placed as a priority in implementing the stormwater utility. So again, I'm just curious. To me, that the devil's in the details, and I kind of put those in the buckets of education, which is outreach and awareness. Administration is that overhead how is this going to be administered, the implementation, who pays for what, and those categories. And then finally, evaluation. After a year or 2 years or 3 years into this, is what we intended to do, is it really doing? Are we getting what we wanted out of this? Do adjustments need to be made, or did we hit a home run out of the park? So again, there's still a lot to be done in my mind, and to me, and this is just my humble opinion, but that recommendation list is really the prioritization that I think we need to go forward with. And I don't know if that needs to be addressed in May or come back from the consultants to say, you know, step 1 through step whatever. That to me is the way to proceed.
City manager can help you a lot on that. And if you would ask anybody in the task force what recommendation number 1 is, they'll tell you it's outreach and education, and we're all frustrated that we can't go forward. All of us are.
Commissioner, is it, I'd like it, if this is a fair statement, I kind of want it to be out there in the public. We have this comprehensive stormwater management plan being developed now. And we'll probably know what that looks like before we set a rate for a utility.
Oh, by far, yeah.
Should we be expecting that we've got right now you're budgeting an annual cost anywhere from 1.1 to 1.5 million each year?
Yeah, if you'll average.
Is it a reality that because of what the comprehensive stormwater management plan recommends, that could actually be 2.5 million each year?
It could be maybe not that much, but it can be more. Once we've already got some feedback on the Silver Lakes management plan that I referred to a minute ago, there'll be some changes, and they're going to cost some money. On the other hand, you commissioners may decide that you want to put more capital projects out into the future, and that will be your decision. Once a year, you'll be able to vote how much money you want to spend on stormwater management, and the staff will make that work for stormwater management.
I guess let me ask a more direct question.
Okay.
From the example potential rate that you have in the presentation, does that account for any other expenditures that may come out of?
No.
So it's looking at the bare minimum of 1.1 to 1.5.
Well, it's not bare minimum, but if you will average out those, you'll see that the average comes just a tiny bit under 1.4 million. And that's probably what we're going to probably what we'll end up collecting from the city and from the private owners the first year or two. And it will be up to you. You may want to take more money out of the general fund to make up to go along with what capital improvements are going to take. The O&M is fairly set. Their O&M is not going to go up much, other than the consultant worked in cost of living increases. But the O&M is fairly stable, but it's the capital expenses that just kill it. So you may decide you want to move them out. You may decide you don't want to do Basin 40 until year after next, or you may decide you don't want to put a new storm drains down Bayard until year after next, or on out. We're in pretty good shape right now, our stormwater system. Almost none of you have water standing in front of your house, except me. And the stormwater, we're not doing a bad job. I'm sorry. Here I am ranting on again.
I guess my concern is we're looking at, and what's going to be in the public is a sample rate an example that you've proposed.
If you want to go with that, yeah.
And that could dramatically change between now and when this eventually gets implemented. But thank you for that clarification.
Well, I'll just reiterate one last time that my preference would be to postpone this, the decision on moving forward till we get more public input. I'm not convinced that even the members of the public here that are not on the task force fully understand everything and have given their opinions. However, I'm reading the tea leaves. It looks like we might as well entertain a motion, if so choose, And I would suggest the motion is something like this, that we move to task the city administration with creating an implementation plan with respect to the possibility of establishing a stormwater utility. Or word out.
If I could pretend to be the solicitor right now, I don't think we have on the agenda the ability to vote.
No, we can come to a consensus.
Yeah,
We-
I
we
think
cannot vote.
you kind of see where we're moving, and I think it's more appropriate to let the public weigh in some more. And so I agree with waiting to May.
If you really want the public to weigh in, let me do outreach.
Well,
Commissioner
here's my
Sharp, go ahead.
concern. I really do not want to see in the Cape Gazette that here is the rate that property owners will be paying. And I have every confidence that won't be in there. But my real question is, what are we going to put on our site, or what outreach would happen between now and May? Because I fully support getting more people aware and involved, but are they going to see the same support documents that we have in front of us today, or is there something else that will be available? Am I making sense?
Well, I
what
think
I'm asking?
my expectation would be that they see the exact same support documents that we had today, and make their comments based on that. And then at our next meeting, May 8th, whatever it is, May 8th maybe, then we take it up and we go further and we can even have a vote at the special meeting on the 18th if we choose. But I don't expect anything new to come out of it, because there is nothing new to be presented, I don't think, until we have that vote.
So it begs the question for me, what is going to generate for our public a more assertive view of what the documents are that we're looking at today? I don't know if we could put city manager, would you like to say something?
Commissioner Sharp, if I could turn this over to our.
Yes, I was hoping you would.
Communications manager, Lynn Cohn. She and I have been working on some thoughts and beliefs.
Yes, thank you.
I think she has something to discuss with the commissioners and the mayor.
So, good morning. As I've been listening to your discussion and thinking about appropriate ways that we can share with the community where we are at this point, my suggestion would be that we do a lines in the sand issue completely dedicated to the stormwater utility discussion. We can provide links to the report, do a story that kind of summarizes the information shared here today. I thought about a utility, a flyer included in utility bills. I don't think we have time to do that at this point. Another possibility down the road is if we implement the engagement software that you approved as part of the FY24 budget, a stormwater utility page would be probably the #1 page to create there. So those were my thoughts as I listened to the conversation today.
Thank you for being ready to.
But a stormwater utility page cannot happen until we say we're going to do a stormwater utility.
I think it is imperative, to Commissioner Sharp's point earlier, why are we doing this? And part of this communication plan that goes out so we get feedback before the May workshop meeting is, what is the history that you articulated with the institutional knowledge, Commissioner Lagree, exactly why we are doing this. And it's had an impact on advisories for the beach. We need a very clear rationale on why, in layman's terms, for the public to read, on why we would move this forward. And that is the piece that I didn't see today that has to be demonstrated before we have our next meeting.
I completely support that, and I think the other question that I'm getting, that I stumble around a little bit with, is why now? Why now? I mean, we've all been here for decades, many of us. Why now? And I know there's a good, succinct answer to why are we doing this? Why are we doing this and why now?
I totally agree. I think if we create Stormwater 101 type of information, and a frequently asked questions page that's on the website available to share with homeowners associations, condo associations, all of that information to get out there and let people know exactly what this is. I think that's the only way we're going to get people to react to getting public input. If the mayor and I agree that that's important, but we have to have something for them to react to. And I think this is the questions, FAQs or Stormwater 101, whatever you want to call it, or combination thereof, is to motivate feedback. And that is what I would like to hear more of.
Commissioner Lagree did a great job articulating it earlier. We just need to put that in writing.
I did this presentation first in the 22nd of November. The whole town. No? You all know about it when I did that? No? I also presented before the Homeowners Association. They all remember my presentation, right? I make my case.
Mayor, I don't know if it's just a matter of semantics, but I mean, we could, if the board could say, we can approve a utility at a voting meeting, and vote for the utility with no fee structure. Just say develop the fee structure, because you still got to come back and approve the rate. Whereas we could go ahead, whether we call it a utility at the next meeting or not, or just develop the implementation instructions. But if we set it up as we're approving moving forward as a utility, then we can develop the details and the implementation plan and the rate structure that would go along with that, knowing that we got to come back to the board to approve a rate structure. Could we have a utility with zero fee at this point in time until we come back with better ammunition as to better, more refined numbers and a plan for implementing it? So maybe we can vote on a utility at the next meeting, just with $0. And then we move forward with the outreach, the program development, all those, the implementation plan, all those things that would then move it forward to setting a rate at some point in time to then start charging. I don't know. I'm not a municipal government guy.
Dan, you got something quick? We can close this out shortly.
Yes, I do. First of all.
Your name?
Jan Conacy, 42 Oak Avenue, member of the Stormwater Utility Task Force, representing Save Our Lakes. We could do a whole, and not communicate about stormwater utility fees and just educate people about stormwater. Unless you're impacted about stormwater, you don't know anything about it. As I said earlier, the people on my street said, we don't have a problem. So you know, intellectually, you know about these things. Emotionally, when you hear from somebody who has their yard flooded all the time, those are the kinds of things, is just to educate people about stormwater. The number of, and that could start immediately. I think there was, like, in the last lines in the sound, a black and orange or black and green article, okay, stormwater. How many people in this town know that actually Lake Girard and Silver Lake are stormwater ponds? None of my neighbors did, because they never think about it. They just see the pond there and what happens to the pond because of stormwater. So I think that we need to educate people about stormwater first before we even talk about a utility fee. Secondly, we on the committee said there were an order of things. Stormwater master plan. How do you know what your goals and objectives are unless you have a master plan? Where do you want to go? What do you want to do with it? So we needed a master plan. That was our first requirement. Secondly, and guys and ladies, I hate to say this, but we should have had impervious surfaces mandated here years ago. You could do that at your next meeting. It's not a big deal to mandate all hard surfaces. When they start building hotels everywhere, when they pave a parking lot, like they did, I think Suzanne pointed out, in front of one of the big buildings, the realtor buildings or something, used to be a gas station years ago. That's stormwater runoff all over. We could have been preventing that for the last 2, 3, 4 years in this huge building boom. We can stop it now. You could stop it now. But you guys need to move. There are all kinds of things that you could do while you're looking at stormwater utility fees, while you're waiting for the master plan. How much stuff flows into the lake? nitrogen, fertilizer, all those things, you know, I mean, so those could all be done while we're waiting for the master plan. And an agreement that, yes, the committee agreed, we all needed, well, mostly we all agreed, that we needed a stormwater utility fee, the method of funding, et cetera. But we need to educate people about stormwater, what it is and how it impacts them. Otherwise, they're not going to be receptive to anything. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Woody, you state your name and relationship to the city, please.
Mark Mardwald, former lifeguard lieutenant with the Rehoboth Beach Patrol. Within the last half hour, I heard a comment regarding the solution to pollution. I just kind of want to rectify what I heard because I have a Bachelor of Science degree in biology from the University of Toledo. After that, I got a certificate in environmental studies from the University of Akron. And I believe the phrase that I was supposed to hear was, dilution is not the solution to pollution. I think I heard something totally opposite from what I just said, which is what I learned in college and beyond college. I just wanted to point that out. I don't know if it was a mistake. You accidentally let the word not out or you got the whole idea confused, but I believe the statement, the scientific principle is that dilution is not the solution to pollution. Thank you.
Thank you, Woody. With that, and if there's no, Sam, I'm going to close it off after you, so make
Sam
this
Cooper,
powerful.
13 Newcastle Street. All right, here we go. I agree with that. I think the cart's still before the horse here. You need to know what you're going to do before you set out to raise money to do it. And I guess, Jay, just to try to bring this back a little bit, I've heard a lot of talk and I'm confused by some of it. What does a utility, in one or two sentences, what does a utility give us that we don't have today?
Utility gives us the legal authorization to collect a fee.
So it's a means of taxation.
It is not related to your tax
okay.
bill or not related to
All right.
anything.
So then it all
appropriate to
comes
value.
back to the money. And nowhere has anybody made a case that the city can't afford to do the stormwater maintenance and management and improvements that it's set out, it's tasked to do. We recently, within the last 3 or 4 years, probably about the same time this started, implemented a hotel tax, not because there was a need for it, but because the state said you can do it. The city did it. Where's that money? Why don't you dedicate it to this? I have every expectation. I know that you can spend every cent you can get your hands on something. And,
True.
I'm a bit disconcerted when you said that, no, we're not going to put this money aside. We're going to commingle it with the city's other general funds. And a statement that was in, I skimmed through the report last night. I'll hopefully go back and read it in more detail. But it said that we don't want the stormwater to have to compete with other city services, like police and what have you. So what you're saying is we would like to have the prerogative to lay off police officers and cut back on the beach patrol before we cut back on stormwater costs. That's what that says to me.
That's really stretching it.
Well, tell me what having a dedicated source of funding means. If it means that it's not going to get cut with everything else.
Bert wants to have a designated, and I agree, wants to have a designated cost center set up in the general fund, which is stormwater. And we can collect the fee and it all goes into that fund. And anything that comes out of that fund goes to, it'll be invoiced and accounted for. But we're going to also have to move more money into that fund, as Commissioner.
Well, why can't you why not set it aside in a separate account?
It will be in a separate account. It just won't be in an enterprise fund.
Okay. Well, I guess that's an accounting term.
Yes.
but I mean, I think it means you can't use it for other things.
Can be, yes. You can use anything for
But
anything. You
again-
realize that we've been taking money out of the water fund and moving it into the general fund.
Yes,
Which is not a good thing to do. But Bert keeps
City's
track
done
of
it
it.
for, ever since it had a water system.
I know it has, and we've been answering at the audit committee every year about that. But if you set up a fund in the general fund and have it be stormwater, you can move money into it and out of it without having to answer
So
to
it's
anybody.
just another means of taxing the people. I mean, it's not that the city can't raise the money through some other means.
Do you think that your water bill is tax?
Is it a tax?
Is your water bill a tax? You're paying for what you're using. You're paying
And
for the
what I
use of
use,
water.
Yes. But the water is, you provide me with a specific service. I mean, one of the reasons that I always thought that I had a problem with charging people for stormwater, the person's yard that does flood, what are you giving them? I think I ought to, if my water goes off, you know, if I don't have any water, I call the city and say, I don't have any water, and they better get over there and fix it. If I got stormwater laying in my front yard coming off the street, are you going to come over and fix it right away?
If that's what you're going to get stormwater management, and we will manage stormwater.
And you know,
and
again, I think
we
you
will
need to
take
lay
care
the
of it.
predicate for this, and I think it was touched on. Really, in stormwater, there's two things: there's quantity, getting rid of it, and there's quality in what we discharge.
That's right.
And we have no discussion about how we hope to improve the quality of the wastewater, or if we even plan to improve it.
That's what the stormwater management plan does. It slows
is
it
that
down, soaks it in, and cleans up the quality.
Is the stormwater management plan underway?
It is.
And is that a 30,000-foot level, or is it a street-by-street flooding issue? What's?
We haven't clearly defined whether it's going to be a street by street, but right now it's going to be a high-level management plan based off of both all the lakes, all the current infrastructure that's in place, and future growth, future runoff, identify all the different types of storms that are capable impacting the city of Rehoboth Beach. I mean, it's not a granular, I'm going to look at catch basin number 3084 and see what the flow is.
I mean, it's not about solving.
Well, I mean, there's no way to
flooding
identify
problems.
Well, there's no way to identify flow monitoring for particular catch basins at this point in time. That would be so granular and so expensive, it would be cost prohibitive.
Well, I just think that needs to be out there, what it's actually going to be doing.
I mean, the stormwater management plan, it will be a comprehensive plan to address the stormwater for the city. I mean, at this stage, Kevin and I are working with the consultants to identify what the scope of work is going to be over the course of not just this year, but many years that this potential stormwater utility would be impacting over the course of many budgeting years. So, I mean, I can't answer your question exactly because we're not.
But it really more is a high level. It's not getting down and looking at actual flooding issues currently.
I think it would have to identify, like Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, it would have to look at points of friction or points of emphasis for particular neighborhoods and stormwater management focus points within our city infrastructure. It has to, because we know there are issues that should need to be addressed. I think you pointed out, was it number 40? Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm trying to get the numbering system of the new community. But yes, it would address certain areas as pain
Known
points.
issues,
Known
right.
issues, yes, that's the best way of saying it, known issues.
Larger known issues.
Yes.
Okay, I guess to wrap it up, it's all about the money, and Commissioner Bennett's comment about the property owners not bearing the full expense of this. I just think about, do you want to set up this laborious billing system and stuff if you're not willing to, I mean, if you're only going to end up taking in a few $100,000 with it, is it really worth the effort? I mean, this city can find the money to do what needs to be done without this new tax. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Anybody else? Last time, Suzanne, I'm going to cut you off at 3 minutes.
While she's coming up, just to clarify.
No, but please come up.
We will have the comprehensive stormwater management plan before we vote on a utility or a fee, correct? That's been stated once or twice. I just want to make sure that that's correct.
You've got to get the cart back behind the horse.
I would just clarify one thing. We say the cart is before the horse, or the horse is before the cart, however you want to do it. I mean, the Stormwater Master Plan is going to pull in a bunch of things that have been ongoing for years, right? We started this certainly 5-6 years ago with various things, to include the Byard Avenue Storm Basin, the Basin 40 plan, the water quality things in the ocean, water quality in lakes. We have a lake management plan for Silver Lake that we're going to get this summer. We had a Silver Lake, or a Lake Gerard management plan done some years ago. So the stormwater management plan is going to bring all those together with some concrete recommendations and ideas on what they would recommend that the city do. And then we would lay those out in a plan. But it's not like a lot of it's not already known to us. I mean, that's how we've developed the operational budget and the 5-year plan based upon what we have seen in those individual pieces. This is going to be tying them all together. So I don't think it's going to be a massive list of projects from the stormwater management plan that we don't already know from these other things that we've done individually throughout the past several years. So thus, I guess, to come back around to my original thing, is I don't think we need to do these in a linear sequence, which is why we're doing multiple things at one time. The Lakes Management Plan for Silver Lake is ongoing. Stormwater Overall Comprehensive Management Plan is ongoing. This development of the feasibility study for a utility was ongoing. So I think the timing is kind of meshing pretty well, so that we'll get the Silver Lake, we'll get the Comprehensive Stormwater Management Plan. We've got hopefully going to have guidance to move forward with the utility, and we can develop what that rate would be, and we have all that data coming together at this point in time that I think it's kind of playing out pretty well. Certainly doesn't go back to the whatever year CDP when SOLA said we ought to do something, but certainly over the last probably 5-6 years, there's been a massive amount of time and effort trying to bring all these things together to reach whatever was in the CDP at some point in time, and it certainly was done in this recent CDP. So,
As you read
that's
the
my 2
Silver
cents.
Lakes management plan that the Corps of Engineers just put out a few days ago, they have a section in there on the SOLA 3's contribution. It's uncanny how accurate it was. It's just incredible. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Come forward to introduce yourself again, and we're going to
Juan
finish up
Grosbeak
with you.
on the task force. You'll notice in the draft, and I do agree with this point Jan Conacy made, that changing new construction renovation to mandate pervious cover for surfaces like driveways is almost like a footnote. So even before this prospective May meeting, you could draft an ordinance to mandate pervious cover for new construction and renovations. There was a massive asphalt parking lot just replaced with new asphalt on the north side of the avenue between 4th and 5th Streets back in November. And so that's a lost opportunity, and we're behind Dewey Beach by, it sounds like, almost 10 years. And I agree with former Mayor Cooper. We have the means to fund this. We can ask the visitors to bear more of the cost of this than we seem to be doing. And I hope you will look carefully, especially as the administrative costs of implementing this and having this as a permanent fixture in the city of Rehoboth Beach are completely unknown. We're just guesstimating a lot of these things. So do you really want to enlarge the scope of government when we have things like the transfer tax, the hotel tax, that can cover these needed expenditures? And I would think they probably will approach $2 million a year within another couple years. Thank you, and hope to see that ordinance with the pervious cover for new construction within like 6 weeks. That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. With that, I'll bring it back to the commissioners. I'd like to close this out. Because we're not able to vote today, we will put this on a May 8th workshop meeting and then the May 8th special meeting if we want to take a formal vote on this. Is there any further comment up here? Commissioner Bennett?
I do have one quick question. If the city were able to fund this entire program would that eliminate the need to have a utility?
No.
No? Okay.
Not according to 5101.
Well, can you explain that more either now or at the next meeting? Would you do that and have that in writing for us in a presentation so that we can better understand that? Ed, did you want to finish out something?
Maybe Commissioner Chernowski can do that.
No, I just wanted to comment, in the communication that Lynn with Kevin and Commissioner Legree's help, part of the why now, and, you know, a few people have said, well, we can fund this in the city, and sure, we could just fund this out of the general fund. But if part of the rationale on why now is because we have other increased capital costs coming up in the next few years, or because of deferred maintenance, there's more capital outlays related to stormwater that are coming up. I think all of that just needs to be articulated in this communication on why now. And so we talked about some of the rationale, but if the financial aspect of it, I think, needs to also be included in that on why now and the rationale. So that's my only comment.
All right, thank you. Anything else?
Just one
Commissioner
brief,
Marker?
I just want to reiterate something that the mayor stated, which is that he feels that the issue of stormwater needs to be managed, and I think instituting the utility is a means to do that, and I think that needs to be emphasized. You know, we can manage this, but I think I think it just has a lot more clarity and transparency if we have effectively a financial mechanism in the form of utility to do that.
Thank you. If that's all, I want to thank all the members of the public for being here. I hope those that are watching learn something and will send us some feedback before the next meeting. We will again have this on the May 8th workshop and special meeting that immediately follows that workshop. And with that, there being no other business, I adjourn this meeting at 11:52 a.m. Thank you very much.
That was good, Jay.